What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I am your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Kelsey Surmacz of the Hockey News. For over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. Got lots to talk about today. Of course, you can catch all of Mike and Kelsey's writing over at the Hockey News, but today, going to chat a little bit about some things going on around the NHL. First up, we got to talk about the New York Rangers. After a very disappointing 2024-25 season, the Rangers have had some issues scoring through the first month of the season, to put it lightly. They currently have the second worst goals per game average in the league. So they're averaging 2.38 goals per game. They've got the second worst power play at 12.1%. And Adam Fox is the team's leading scorer on defense with 11 points in 13 games. Big contributors, or who we might consider big contributors, guys like JT Miller, Artemi Panarin, Mika Zibanejad, all had extremely slow starts. So, Mike, what do you think is the root cause of these issues? Is it really just a slow start that, they'll be able to kind of shake themselves out of it? Or is the Rangers offensive core just maybe not as good as they've been made out to be? Do you think they turn things around here?
Well, they're good, but they're 2 years older and 2 years away from the year that they, won the President's Trophy. If you look at it, Panarin almost scored 50 goals 2 years ago. Vinny Trocheck had 77 points. Zibanejad had 72 points. They're not going to hit those totals. I mean, Panarin's 34 years old. And that's probably one of the reasons why, the Rangers, if he asks for a ton of money in free agency as a unrestricted before next July 1st, they probably are going to pass because, I don't know how much they really want to, invest in a guy who's on, going to be on the dark side of 35. So I think, and combined with that, the young players who they're depending on to sort of fill the void, the Will Coolies, the Alexis Lafrenières, they have not stepped up. They have a combined 3 goals so far this season. Now, the most surprising thing is their power play used to be something that they dined out on. That was something that, Zibanejad had a ton of points. Chris Kreider, who's no longer there, you have to factor in all the players that they traded out. The Kreider and Capo Caco and all these other players, that's affecting it as well. But the power play has been very ineffective, as you mentioned. And if that doesn't get straightened out, I mean, Igor Shesterkin, can only stop so many pucks, and they need to score goals to make the playoffs and succeed.
Well, and Kelsey, covering the Penguins, I mean, you saw the Rangers a couple times early in the season. Part of that, that stretch where they could not score a goal at home, it seemed. And when they played the Penguins a couple times early in the season. So from what you've seen, I mean, do you think that this looks like just a slow start for the Rangers, long season, they'll snap out of it? Or does this team just look like maybe this is who they are?
I'm going to go in the camp of this is who they are. I've never thought that the depth of this team, especially on the forward front, was very good. And I think that's kind of starting to be exposed, especially with Vinny Trocheck out of the lineup. If they're not getting production from their top 6, which they haven't up to this point, JT Miller leads all forwards with 8 points. That's just not going to cut it. They don't have the depth on this roster to really make up for that. So I think this is just a team getting exposed for its lack of depth and its lack of scoring depth. I just don't think that there's much there in the bottom 6. I mean, you have a rookie playing second line center right now. Connor Sherry, Taylor Radish is off to a pretty good start. But aside from that, I mean, they just don't have much, I don't think. And when your best players, who also happen to be some of your oldest players, just aren't playing their best hockey, that tends to get exposed. So I think that's exactly what we're seeing from them. Same thing on the blue line. Adam Fox is pretty much carrying that blue line, I think. That bottom four just doesn't impress me much. So I think this is just being exposed as a team that's not very deep.
Well, it's kind of, looks like one of the powerhouses traditionally of the NHL, maybe kind of coming down to earth a little bit here. However, we've got some new younger teams emerging on the other side of the continent. Actually, the Anaheim Ducks have been off to quite the start this year, specifically Leo Carlson and Cutter Gauthier. So while the Ducks maybe didn't have the strongest start to the season, these two guys really have, and you can kind of see the core of what's being built there in Anaheim. So Carlson, Gauthier, both, have kind of helped this team surge into second place in the Pacific Division after a little bit of a bumpy start. So Carlson's got 16 points in 11 games, Gauthier 12 points in 11 games. He's got 7 goals, which leads the team. So both of these guys, I mean, these are supposed to be these kind of young core players that make up this next sort of generation of Anaheim Ducks. So they're both in the final year of their ELCs. They're going to become RFAs this summer. Mike, how much do you think each player is going to earn on his next deal, just with what they've done so far this year?
Well, this is the reason why the protracted negotiations with Mason McTavish and the eventual signing of him to the $7 million AAV was sort of a shot across the bow to these two particular players, because I think they've established this is the internal cap that we're going to try to establish. That's what the Bruins did in the past. That's what some of the non-state tax teams do, and that's what Pat Verbeek is trying to establish in Anaheim. Now, I don't know whether you can get Carlson, who's a center and has 16 points in 11 games, for $7 million. It would probably have to be a 4 or 5 year deal. I think they want to get these young, talented players signed as long as possible. But I do think the McTavish signing was to say, okay, we'll pay you, but we're not going to blow the doors off. You have to prove it. And that might mean sort of a mid-range Austin Matthews 4 or 5 year contract, and not the 7 or 8 year deal that everybody seems to be taking right now.
Well, especially with the cap set to, start going up here, this is kind of uncharted territory for players like this looking to negotiate these new deals. I mean, Kelsey, with that in mind, what do you think players like these, especially as Mike mentioned Carlson as a center, what kind of contracts do you think these guys can demand next year?
Well, I think the demand is just going to keep going up as the cap goes up. I mean, Anaheim's projected to have 40.5 million in cap space next summer. So they have a little bit of wiggle room to work with, and that cap space is only going to increase year by year. So that's going to kind of increase incentives for these player agents, especially for these younger players who are starting to make a name for themselves in the league, to demand more. And you can hardly blame them. So for Leo Carlson, especially as a center, I agree with Mike. I think that he's probably going to demand a little bit more. I can see, Gauthier being, as he said, kind of in that 5 million range or so. But I do think Carlson's probably going to command more along the 7 to 8 million range, potentially even more than that, depending on the kind of season he has. And as he said, 16 points in 11 games. He's off to a pretty good start. If he gets in the ballpark of 100 this year, we're going to be talking a little bit more than 7 million, I think.
Yeah, definitely going to be an interesting summer next year for the Anaheim Ducks in that regard. One player who was initially supposed to be kind of part of this core group in Anaheim was Trevor Zegras. Of course, did not work out in Anaheim. He ended up getting traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. And so far, I would say it's worked out pretty well for him. He is leading the Flyers in scoring right now. He's got 13 points in 12 games. Of course, Zegras had 5 seasons prior in Anaheim that were just riddled with injuries, and that led to a lot of inconsistency in his game. And then, of course, ultimately, sort of that change of scenery trade to Philadelphia. So, Mike, it seems like it's working out, as I said, pretty well for Zegras so far. But do you think, at least early on in Philly, can he solidify himself as the top line center that I think a lot of people expected him to be in Anaheim? Could he do that in Philly? And if so, how much do you think Rick Tocchet and the culture and the coaching in Philadelphia deserves for this kind of early surge from him?
Well, Tocchet deserves a lot of credit across the board, because anybody who back in the day dealt with Phil Kessel and got the best out of Phil Kessel, he was the Kessel Whisperer. That was his nickname, and that was apt because he got the best out of him when he was an assistant in Pittsburgh. With Zegras, offensive talent has never been the question. The question is, his defensive consistency and his durability. And he's so far, knock on wood, his durability has been there. But if you look at it, in the key word that you said was center, he's a 38% face-off guy. You cannot have a top line center at 38%. He needs to live with Sean Couturier and basically learn how to take face-offs if he's going to be a top line center. If not, basically either put him on the wing or you have a winger take the face-offs and then he plays up the middle. But that complicates things. So he's got to get better. He's got to get to at least 48 or 49% to not be a complete liability, because a top line center plays 18, 19 minutes a night and you can't lose that many face-offs.
Well, as you said, defensive responsibility, big part of that top line center role. So obviously hoping to see that develop some more in him. Kelsey, do you think that Zegras is, that he really just kind of needed this change of scenery, new organization, new teammates, new line mates to kind of come into this role as a top line center? And do you share those concerns about his faceoff percentage?
Yeah, I think the face-offs are a reasonable concern because, as Mike said, that's something that's expected of a top-line center. You got to be winning about half your draws. So if he's in the 30 range, that's no good for a top-line center. But on the defensive side, I think there have been some improvements there. And I do think he needed a change of scenery. And I do give some credit to Rick Tocchet there, because that's the kind of play that Rick Tocchet demands. He's the kind of coach that demands that strong two-way play. He expects that defensive responsibility. And I think to a certain extent, Zegras needed somebody in his ear about that, somebody to kind of push him on that front. So I do think, credit goes to the coaching staff for being able to work with him and really get the most out of him so far this season. But you got to give credit to Zegras too. I mean, this is somebody who, again, needed a change of scenery. He's capitalizing on that so far, and he's thriving in the environment that he's in. So credit to Zegras, but I think Rick Tocchet kind of deserves a little bit of praise here too, for just being able to get the most out of him and really tapping into his two-way game.
Well, and as Mike said, you have to hope that physically he holds up, because the injuries have been an issue in the past for Zegras. So, so far so good on that front, but we'll see what happens here. You mentioned the change of scenery being a good thing for Trevor Zegras. I want to talk about another player who has had a change of scenery that maybe hasn't worked out as well, at least in the early going. That's Nikolaj Ehlers. So, of course, he was one of the top free agents available last summer, ended up signing with Carolina. It was a huge get for them. He's now with the Hurricanes. He's playing on the top line with guys like Sebastian Aho, Seth Jarvis. Despite that, he has not scored a goal yet. He has just 4 assists in 11 games for Carolina. Obviously not the kind of production that they were expecting when they signed him to that free agent deal. So the team overall, though, has still been pretty excellent offensively. I mean, they've put up the 3rd most goals per game in the league so far this year. So that being said, they are on a 4-game losing streak at this point in the season. So, Mike, what do you think? Do you think the Hurricanes consider shaking up their lines? Do you think how big of an impact do you think Ehlers is on this? Do you think maybe he needs to get relegated? What do you think the Hurricanes need to do here?
Well, the first thing is they shouldn't panic. I mean, moving from Winnipeg to Carolina, it's a change. It's not like a Mikko Rantanen thing where he was traded and he really didn't want to go to Carolina. He chose to go to Carolina. So maybe he's putting a little bit of internal pressure on himself. But I would consider shaking it up. I mean, I believe he played mostly with Scheifele in Winnipeg. Maybe the Aho thing is not a good fit. Maybe playing with Logan Stankoven or playing with Jackson Blake on a second line takes a little bit of pressure off of him. And right now, the goal scoring with Carolina, it's all Seth Jarvis. He's leading the team with 7 goals. He's making a case to make Team Canada for the Olympics. So he's carrying the burden right now. But eventually, they're going to need Ehlers to produce, and I would think that that's going to happen, but right now it's just a slow go.
Yeah, you've had some issues with this Carolina team with getting slow starts. I mean, just recently on the show, we were talking about Andrei Svechnikov not being able to get it going. He has picked it up here of late, but again, now you're seeing the team offense kind of start to slip. So, I mean, Kelsey, what do you make of this slow start for Ehlers? Do you think this is something that he'll be able to kind of shake out of? And how much does his position on the top line impact that? Do you think that maybe mixing it up might be a good idea for him and for the team?
Well, first of all, I do agree with Mike in that this is a pretty big change of scenery for Ehlers. I think you need to give him some time. This is a really good player with a track record. He's a perennial 20-plus goal scorer. This guy's going to figure it out eventually. He does need some time. But on that note, I mean, another thing to consider here is that the Carolina Hurricanes power play is atrocious. They're operating at 9.4% right now. They're at the worst clip in the league. And Ehlers had 22 power play points last season. So I think this is something too, if Carolina can figure out their power play and get that going, that should help Ehlers a lot. So I think it's a combination of things. I think it's that change of scenery thing. They just need a little bit more time with him. But at the end of the day, I think some power play production could really start to kind of help ease Ehlers out of this little slump, out of this slow start that he's having. And that's another thing too, if Carolina can't really figure out that power play and get it out of the basement, they're going to have some issues, scoring goals on special teams, and that's going to be an issue for them. So I think this is something for Ehlers that, if they can get that power play going, that'll help him. But I think he's going to figure it out eventually 5-on-5. This is a good player with a track record. So we're going to see him figure it out.
Yeah, so maybe the key there is not as much mixing up the forward lines, might be mixing up the power play units, kind of trying to change up some personnel there. Other teams have had success with that as well, so it could just be a little shakeup that's needed there. Moving on, kind of switching gears a little bit, I'm sure Kelsey, this might be tough to talk about last night's game between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Pittsburgh Penguins. Of course, Penguins, just for a refresher for everyone else, Penguins were up 3-0, ended up losing 4-3. But one thing that we do have to call out from that game is that Morgan Rielly had an assist on William Nylander's third period goal, one of William Nylander's third period goals. And when he did that, he surpassed Thomas Kaberle, now sits second on the franchise's all-time list for points by a defenseman. So he's got 522 points with the Leafs. So Rielly finished, he had 2 assists in the game. He now has 9 points through 12 games for the Leafs this season. Mike, how important do you think it is for the Leafs to get offensive production from Rielly and really just from the blue line in general, I think, to remain competitive this season?
Well, Rielly is the key in terms of offense on the blue line because you really can't depend on. I mean, Oliver Ekman-Larsson's having a pretty decent year, 8 points, and Jake McCabe is not an offensive producer. He has 6 points. You're not going to get much offense out of Chris Tanev, and the value of Rielly is even increased right now because Tanev had a second concussion in the span of 2 weeks on Saturday, and probably is going to be out for, I would say, probably 3 weeks to a month to recover from that. But Rielly is extremely important to the Leafs. I mean, where he really is important is on the power play, and their power play is as bad as Carolina's. They're 31st, and his 9 points, all of them are at even strength. They're shaking up their power play. They put rookie Easton Cowan on the power play last night, and that didn't work out. So, the absence of the name, the player that shall not be named, has been reflected on the power play most of all. And they're going to have to, if they're going to have success going into the playoffs, they're going to have to find a way to have success on the man advantage.
Yeah, Kelsey won't make you rehash anything from the game last night, but to Mike's point about Rielly and offense from the blue line in Toronto. I mean, we talk about this a lot with the player who I'm going to name. That would be Mitch Marner, obviously, with his departure. Kind of questions about where's the offense going to come from in Toronto, and looking a lot at guys like Matthew Nyes, Austin Matthews. But I mean, how important do you think the blue line is going to be in terms of sort of replenishing that production, because you don't have a 1-for-1 replacement for Marner?
I mean, you said it. I think that they kind of need to rely on this production from the blue line because they just don't have the scoring depth at the forward position without Marner. And I know that's oversimplifying things a bit, but that's just what happens when you lose a 100-point player and you don't really have the means to replace him on the roster. So, Rielly's off to a good start, and I think that they're going to have to continue to get this production from him and Ekman Larson and just some of these other guys on the back end. As Mike said, their power play really has to improve. That has to get going. But when you lose a player like Marner, this is what happens. You kind of need everybody to start contributing, everybody to pitch in. And that's just so far not happening enough on the forward front. So if they can't really target anybody in the trade market, as far as forwards, you expect them to probably make a move eventually if they're in contention. But, for now, they're going to have to stay afloat with their blue line being a big part of that production picture because I just don't think, like the Rangers, they just don't have enough forward depth right now as far as scoring.
Well, I'm not disputing anything that Kelsey's saying because she's right. But the funny thing is, you look at it, and the Leafs are second in the NHL in scoring. They have 47 goals.
Yeah.
Their problem this year is that they've given up 47 goals. They were fourth in the NHL in goals against last year, and they can't keep the puck out of the net. It's a product of Anthony Stolarz being overplayed and Joseph Wall on a leave of absence, and Caden Primo being possibly the worst backup goaltender in the NHL. It's that's the reason, and the team has in front of them has a responsibility as well. But they have to play better defensively, and I think that's the area where Craig Berube was ready to rip somebody's head off after the second period because they showed no energy, and defensively they were inept in the first two periods.
Yeah, they were getting completely hemmed in during that game. I agree with you, Mike. And those defensive woes and holes were definitely showing. So that's definitely a really good point, and they need to shore that up.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely quite the game to watch last night. Do want to stick with the Leafs here for a minute, or at least the Leafs organization. So Elliot Friedman actually reported over the weekend that David Kampf, remember him, is taking a couple days to think about his future with the Maple Leafs. So of course, with the Leafs salary cap situation, Kampf was waived before the start of the season. He has been playing with the Toronto Marlies in the AHL. So he has a 4-year, $9.6 million contract that runs through the 2026-27 season. So next season, carries a $2.4 million cap hit, counts for $1.25 million against Toronto's cap while he's in the minors. So obviously could be a situation where we see maybe a mutual termination, a mutual agreement to terminate. Saw something kind of similar. I mean, he wasn't in the minors, but kind of similar with Brandon Saad in St. Louis last year. I mean, Mike, do you see a potential, mutual agreement to terminate the contract here with David Kampf? And then, do you think he could pursue a roster spot for another team?
Well, centers are, valuable commodities. I mean, the problem here is Kampf I thought was a target for a potential buyout during the summer, but his contract had signing bonus, so the cap relief wouldn't have been that great, and that's why burying him in the minors was more beneficial to the Leafs. They get a little over $1 million in cap relief. He simply is not a Berube player. He only played 59 games last year. He only played 1 game in the playoffs. He's a good defensive center, pretty decent on faceoffs and a decent penalty killer. But the problem that they couldn't find a landing spot for him is because he had another year on his contract. So if he terminates, it could be like Saad, where he finds a home. It could be from the former general manager who got him to Toronto, some guy named Dubas. He might be a fit in Pittsburgh. I thought he would be a fit in Pittsburgh. I thought he might be a fit under Sheldon Keefe in New Jersey. He just is not a fit in Toronto, and the reason that they weren't able to move him was because he had another year on his contract.
Kelsey, what do you think? Would he be a fit in Pittsburgh?
I'm not sure he would be a fit for where the Penguins are now, especially with their roster starting to go young, especially with the start that they're off to. I think they already have a collection of veterans on their roster that they're looking to offload, and I think that would just kind of add to the issue, I guess, so to speak. Because Kampf is a good defensive player, as Mike said. I think he would provide some value for the Penguins, but I don't think he's any different than having a Blake Lizotte on your roster. Just somebody like that. He's kind of in the same ilk. So I think it would kind of just compound that issue of some of these bottom 6 roster spots for the Penguins that probably should be occupied by younger players going forward. Being blocked out. So I'm not sure the fit is in Pittsburgh, but I do agree that it's probably in the best interest of Kampf and maybe the Maple Leafs to just terminate that contract and hope he gets, a chance elsewhere, because I do think he will get a chance elsewhere. This is a player that, at a lower cap hit could be valuable to, a contending team come playoff time. So I do think that this might be a situation where you can see, like Saad, where he gets an opportunity somewhere else if he's willing to terminate. So I think that's probably best for both parties here.
Well, Kelsey, you mentioned those spots on the Penguins roster probably best filled by those younger players. So want to stick with you on this one. One of those younger players, Ben Kindel, has really been standing out as a rookie from the 2025 draft class. He has 5 goals in 12 games for the Penguins. He's averaging just over 13 minutes of ice time per game. So really impressive, scoring efficiency from Kindel, at least from what we've seen so far. Of course, he was drafted 11th overall by the Penguins this past summer. He made a very strong first impression in his first stint in the NHL. So obviously, Kelsey, I don't need to tell you that the Penguins, I think everyone is kind of just waiting for the wheels to fall off with this Penguins team, and it just hasn't happened yet. So, looking at a guy like Kindel, do you think he could be part of keeping this Penguins team competitive in the present while also being a big part of their future?
Well, absolutely, because he already is. And I'm going to pull a stat from yesterday's game that's just unbelievable. Kindel's third line with Ville Koivunen and Tommy Novak controlled 95.5% of the expected goal share in yesterday's game. And this isn't something that's, a oddity. The game before that, they controlled 91% of the expected goal share. Ben Kindel is... You can kind of tell early on when a player's special, when there's star material there. Ben Kindel is going to be a star player in the NHL. And honestly, the more and more I watch him, I'm just baffled at how he fell to 11th overall. This guy was the second most productive forward in the draft class last season, aside from Michael Misa. So, everyone was kind of picking on his size. He's really not that undersized either at 5'11", 182. He's adding weight. So, this is a guy who has it all. He has high hockey IQ. He knows how to drive play. He doesn't look a touch out of place at the NHL level. And even when things started to get a little hairy for Pittsburgh yesterday, Noel Acciari went down with an injury early in the game. Penguins were playing with 11 forwards most of the game. Eventually, in that third period, when things started to go south, he got a little stint as the second line center, and he was doing the same exact things. Ben Kindel's been a top 4 player for this team already. He's 18 years old. And I do think that the Penguins really found a gem here. He's going to continue to help them win games this season. And if the Penguins do happen to make the playoffs at the end of this all, he's going to be a huge reason why. That third line's just been a revelation for the Penguins, as has Ben Kindel. This kid is really impressive to watch in the early going.
Well, that's exactly what you need if you're a team like Pittsburgh that is really kind of banking on this youth movement, carrying the organization forward. I mean, Mike, what do you make of not only what Kindel has done so far this season, but really just what the Penguins have been doing? Again, kind of defying expectations here early in the year.
Well, first with Kindel, in Buffalo, we saw a kid like Zach Benson at 18 years old, who was drafted in the teens. I think it was 13th overall at the draft in Nashville. Make the Sabres as an 18-year-old, and I wondered whether that was the right thing. But he played a full season, played a full second season, and now is on the top line and is producing. It could be the same thing with Kindel. It's not the worst thing to have Sidney Crosby be the guy who is providing tutelage like Mario Lemieux did for him back in the day. So, that's a good thing. Now, I'm not saying that eventually, and, if he cools off or if all of a sudden, he regresses a little bit, he's 18 years old. He could go to play with Team Canada at the World Junior in December. And, he could come back to Pittsburgh. And if they're still in the playoff race and he's performing like he is, then he stays around. If not, he goes back to the Calgary Hitmen or one of the better teams in the Western Hockey League. He's learning valuable lessons as an 18-year-old. So it's not a bad thing. And as long as Pittsburgh, and yeah, I'm surprised Pittsburgh is in it right now. Everybody I think is singing for their supper. You've got a bunch of 1-year contracts, guys like Anthony Mantha and a few other players that are, basically, if they do go bad, are going to end up getting traded, and they want to put the best impression forward. And you also have guys like Crosby, who is, obviously a Hall of Famer, one of the best players of all time. He wants to stay there, and he knows the only way he's going to stay there is if the Penguins are consequential, and he's doing his utmost to make them stay consequential.
Yeah, really impressive to see what's been going on in Pittsburgh and, see if they can continue this, if it can be sustainable throughout the rest of the season. Of course, they're going to have a little bit of a wrench thrown in their schedule. They've got the Global Series against Nashville in Stockholm next week. So we'll see. Sometimes those things can, kind of rattle a team or shake them out of their schedule, their routine, especially a younger team like that. So have to see what happens there. But in the meantime, you can read all about Ben Kindel and the Penguins and Zach Benson and the Buffalo Sabres over at the Hockey News. Read all of the great stuff from Mike and Kelsey and the rest of our writers over there. The Hockey News, of course, has been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head over to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us and listened to us talk some hockey today. We do appreciate it. We will be back with an all-new episode on Thursday. For Mike Augello and Kelsey Surmacz, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.